Hello and welcome to Meet the Therapist. This is Jennifer Summerfeldt and she is our lead therapist. I've asked her to come here today so that we can get to know her a little bit better. You might like to understand what her perspective is, what her modality is. So I'm just going to start, Jennifer, with what attracted you to therapy?
My journey into therapy was my journey of my own healing. So because I personally experienced post-traumatic stress disorder, that was the initiation into my own healing journey, which then opened up the door to working with a whole bunch of different therapists and different modalities. And from there, I knew that I wanted to go into the healing arts and merge my paradigm of childbirth with therapy. And so that's what entered me into therapy.
Okay, and what are your credentials? Where did you go to school? What did you study?
Yeah, so currently I'm a certified Canadian counselor. So my credentials are clinical counseling. I have a master's in counseling psychology. I also have 2 years of graduate studies in sports psychology, otherwise known as peak performance psychology. My undergrad is a minor in psychology and a major in physical activities and sports studies. And then in between all of that, I studied traditional midwifery, I studied holistic doula care, I studied childbirth education, and then for the past 10 years, I've gone deep into understanding trauma, the neurobiology of healing, and the nervous system. And so that complements all the work that I do as a therapist. I also run a team, so I'm the owner and founder of Ask Therapy for Moms, and so that business serves moms across Canada, and I have a team of therapists that work for Ask Therapy and student therapists as well.
Wow, that is impressive. I'm thinking about putting myself in the shoes of somebody who might want to join a group. The last 2 years has been full of conflict and division and strife. So when I'm thinking about coming to a group, what could you tell me as a potential participant to encourage me to come or to put me at ease?
Yeah, well, first of all, I recognize that for a lot of people, going into a group space to engage with your own healing work or to address certain survival emotions such as anger, fear, grief can be really intimidating. I've had a lot of people say to me, I prefer one-on-one because I don't like group space, because I don't want to be vulnerable with a group, because I don't trust the people there. So for a lot of people, a group can feel very scary, very intimidating. And what I have often said to people is that we actually heal collectively. And so we can heal much quicker in a group environment. We can get a lot more out of a group environment than even just one-on-one. Because when we're in a collective, we're experiencing what the group is experiencing. We're relating over shared experiences. We might witness somebody else's process, for example, or hear their story, and that's going to unlock something in us that maybe we wouldn't have had access to had we not heard that person's share or witnessed their experience. So one of the things that's become really apparent, especially over these past 2 years, is that I don't think that we can do the necessary healing work that's required to get us out of survival stress and step us into what I call your thriving state without the collective coming together. So I think we heal quicker in a group. I think it's actually safer for us to be in a group because we co-regulate, and I'll talk more about what that means. So we actually support one another nervous system to nervous system in a group space, which can be very supportive to our nervous systems, finding coherence and regulation again. So that shifting out of survival stress, shifting into thriving states collectively. So I think there's a lot of power in group. One of the key factors that's important when we think about a group is that the group needs to have a foundation of safety. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about safety, I'm not just talking about physical safety, but I'm talking about emotional and psychological safety. And that's set up in the very, very beginning through foundational work that supports the essence of the group so that they understand the boundaries of the group. They understand how to be facilitated in a safe way. They understand what the agreements and rules are within a group environment so that the group can be held in a safe container. So depending on how big the group is, depending on how many people are there, depending on how well the group is relating with one another, all those factors have to be taken into consideration to create a safe container for the group. So once the container is set, then the group can actually kind of shift into the next phase, which is what I would call kind of the down and under, up and out phase. We have the foundation where we set safety, we set the container, we bring in context, information, we bring in connection, we bring in regulation, we learn the skills that are necessary. Then we move into the process itself of doing any of the work that's needed to shift from survival stress to thriving states. That's the down and under, up and out. And then the third phase would be the phase in which we're celebrating. We're stepping into our new story as a group and as an individual. And we're bringing in celebration and honoring into that new story so that we can really walk into our lives carrying this new state of being. So I see it as like a three-phased approach to making sure that, the group is well contained and held in a very safe but therapeutic and healing space.
Okay, so as a participant, it sounds like I'm going to be well taken care of, and it is going to be safe. I'm coming to Conversation Cafe as a participant to work through these conflicting viewpoints. When I come out of these sessions, what's going to happen? What is going to be the result for me? Is everybody going to think like I think?
What's going to happen? I mean, obviously we can't predict what's going to happen, but we can hold an intention. So one of the things that you and I chatted about was how before we could even step into the space where we have different worldviews, we have different experiences, we have different points of views or opinions about the last 2 years. So let's say we're wanting to bring people together who've been in high conflict, or there's like a family member with another family member that needs to come together to be able to sort this out. We can't do that until we've actually had the opportunity to be fully heard in the fullness of our experience. So each participant would have to have that opportunity to be fully heard and then to learn skills that would support their system for growth and healing. And so the beginning phase of that would be that you're going to first of all learn the skills to be able to regulate your emotions. Mm-hmm. If we can't regulate our emotions, there's no way we can sit in conversation therapeutically with somebody else and get to that point where we want to go. Secondly, we need to establish where is it that we want to go. So what are the values that are supporting us to get there? Is there a shared value amongst all group members, let's say, even if there's a difference of opinion? Is there a shared value that the group can collectively agree upon that's going to guide how it is that we move through the space? And then finally, what's the intention? What's the outcome? Is the outcome to be fully heard and understood? Is the outcome that there is a transformation of thought and belief? Is the outcome that there's an expectation that somebody drops a belief, takes on another belief? Or is it that we just want to gain deeper understanding and compassion for the lived experience as a human throughout these past 2 years, for example.
Okay, that's really interesting. The possibilities then are to be heard, to be understood, to learn skills, to actually travel through that conversation that is difficult. And then possibly I might change my mind, or somebody in the group might change their perspective. So not necessarily will we all come to an agreement on a perspective.
Maybe I'll just share this little piece and we can go from there.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last 2 years, I think, has invited people into a relationship with chronic survival stress in a way in which maybe many haven't been aware of. So some people live in chronic survival stress and they're aware of it, but I feel like collectively millions and millions of humans, because of the pandemic, because of the past 2 years, have been catapulted into a state of prolonged survival stress for multiple reasons. So whether that survival stress is coming from a fear of being a loss of freedoms, or whether the survival stress is coming from a fear of the virus itself.
Catching the virus, yeah.
Right? Or the survival stress is fear of your loved ones dying, or survival stress is fear of financial insecurity, instability, right? And everybody's going to have a different degree of their impact, the impact that this has had on their survival stress state. But I think it's fair to say that the majority of the people have been initiated into a prolonged state of survival stress due to a constant message of fear. And so what I want to be able to offer are skills to shift out of that state. We have innate in our biology a state of survival and a state of thriving.
Can I stop you there?
Mm-hmm.
So in learning the skills to shift out of that state,
Mm-hmm.
will then I be able to engage better in those difficult conversations? It seems like not just the last 2 years, but in general, society has become so fast-paced, so competitive, so difficult to buy a house, for example, or to put food on the table. This seems like an ongoing state that we've been in for a number of years, not just the past 2. So I'm wondering, as I learn those skills to regulate my emotions and come out
Mm-hmm.
of this absolute stressed way of living,
Mm-hmm.
and come out into a place where I'm feeling peaceful and relaxed, it sounds like then I'll be able to engage any kind of difficult
Mm-hmm.
conversation and move to solution.
No matter how skilled you are at shifting states from a state of survival to a state of thriving, a difficult conversation will likely always be a difficult conversation. So I think first we have to acknowledge that difficult conversations are difficult by nature, but we can learn how to navigate them better by understanding our own system better. And I say that we have 4 systems that we're working with. We have a biological system, which is our nervous system. And in that nervous system, it's intelligently designed to be able to shift out of survival stress and shift into thriving, or into a thriving state, which actually fosters flourishing, the ability to flourish, just like nature. And so that's our biological system. And we want to befriend that system. We want to understand that system. And then we want to understand our heart system, which is our emotional system. And our emotional system is deeply tied to our biological system. And we know that we have survival emotions of fear and anger and despair. And we have the thriving emotion of joy. And then everything else is a feeling state. Okay, so it's not very complicated. So we want to learn what to do with that emotional material when it gets activated in our system. So a difficult conversation is going to activate, most likely, either fear or anger or despair. And so if we're in a state of fear, anger, or despair, and we've never been shown how to move that energetic material through our system so we can shift states into a thriving state, which will generate more peace, relaxation, connection, right? Possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And we've never been shown how to do that, then we go into protective patterns. And those protective patterns are there for a reason. It's how we've survived. It's how we've gotten to where we are today. But right now, because we're all locked in a survival stress state, we're just bumping up against everybody's protective pattern, and it's showing up in these difficult conversations. So we're not getting anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be able to learn how to befriend our biological system, how to befriend our heart system, which is your emotional system, what to do with the material that shows up, how to move it safely, effectively. And then we want to befriend our mind system. So that's the psychology, the cognitions, the negative thoughts, the beliefs about ourselves and the beliefs we have about others, the beliefs we have about the world at large, how we make sense out of the world. We're filtering everything through that belief.
And do the first two systems have to be attended to before we can get to the cognitive system? Or is it intertwined? How does it work?
I mean, I'll just add there's a fourth system, and then we can answer that question. So I don't always talk about the fourth system, but I think we need to talk about the fourth system because this system is what I believe will support us to actually shift out of this chronic state of survival stress that we're in. And that's your spiritual system. So however you relate to that, your energy body, your soul, your spirit, higher powers, the energetics of the cosmos, however you want to connect to it, we have those four systems. What we know, and then I'll answer that question, but what we know fosters health through the study of neuroscience is something called coherence. So we know that when all four of those systems are singing in tune and in harmony with each other, there's a flow of energy and information that is nice and harmonious. It fosters something called coherence. And when there's coherence between all of those different systems, we thrive. And our system is seeking to thrive. So as a human being, that is what we are propelled towards. Just like the tree in nature wants to thrive, it wants to flourish, it's finding its way, it's trying to find the light and come up through the darkness and all of that. There's a blueprint for us to thrive. And survival stress disrupts that blueprint, makes it hard. So you asked the question, is there an order in which we have to do this? Mm-hmm. To some extent, yes, we have to have some foundational skills first, and that first one is to befriend our biological system, to understand our nervous system, how it works, why it's stuck in a state of survival stress, how to shift out of that state. See, information is the precursor to transformation. If we don't have context, it confuses the system, and if the system is confused, it goes into survival stress. So the more information we have to understand the potential, then the more likely we are to shift into a state of coherence. And in coherence, we will have what I would say regenerative conversations. Conversations that are coming from the heart, not from the lens through which we're seeing reality, not from our limiting beliefs, not from our ego mind. We'll connect heart to heart. And in that space, something magical can happen. And I can't say what that will be because we won't know till it happens. But we have to trust in that. But to get there, we have to understand these systems in ourselves and in others. And then we create the space in which maybe we can all be singing in harmony together. And so even in that difficulty, it might be like plucking a bunch of guitars at different times, and it doesn't sound like it's creating music, and it's maybe disruptive and it's edgy and it's uncomfortable. And we sit in that until there's an attuning that starts to happen. And then maybe all the guitars start to sing in a C chord or a G chord. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we're looking for, which is a bit of resonance. And I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I mean, the world has been in conflict since the beginning of mankind.
Right, right.
This is no different. It's just that it's so in our face right now.
I can't think of many things that are more important than doing this work right now. And I like that you said, I don't know if it can happen. I appreciate that you're not making these promises that, you know, we're all going to agree on the perspective and we're all going to see the world the same. But I think what excites me is that I might be able to learn some skills to regulate myself, to understand the systems that you talked about, and understand and appreciate that other people are much like me and have to work through some of these, the disruption that you're talking about in their own systems. And then we can have some kind of an intelligent, caring conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that excites me. So I really appreciate your time. If you wanted to add anything, please do so. But really good to get to know where you're coming from. And I think this gives the audience a good idea if they want to join one of these groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking if there's something else I want to add to that. Without getting into details about what some of the teachings might sound like. I think it's important to recognize that if we all just kind of come together in a space where we're activated in our survival stress, and we're hoping that somebody else can hear us and understand us and validate our experience, but the other person's having a very different experience than you're having, and they want the same thing too, that we're just going to be in like a vortex of conflict, because we're coming in with that survival emotion in high alert, like it's highly activated in our system, and that survival emotion is what's filling the space. So either fear or anger or despair is filling the space. And that's not our intention here. Our intention isn't to just fill the space with everybody's fear, anger, or despair.
Garbage.
Right? And I mean, we're going to validate our experience of fear, anger, and despair. And we all have a story that supports our fear, anger, and despair. And those stories matter because we're a storied being. We relate through story. But if we just came together and filled that space with that energy, it wouldn't necessarily be conductive to transformation. It would potentially do something that one of my teachers said is called feeding the wound, where we are all relating over our wound. And in that space, there's some kind of shared relation that's happening because of this wound that we're relating over, but there's no shift, there's no change, there's no healing that's happening. We're actually just feeding it. We're giving it actually more power. And I don't think that's the idea here. The idea here is we want to acknowledge everybody's experience, and that we can share in our relating of being in a state of survival stress that has activated these survival emotions that are incredibly challenging to live with, because so many of us have never been shown what to do with it, how to feel it, how to process it, how to make sense out of it, right? It's scary and it's disruptive, and it's creating a lot of problems in a lot of people's lives, especially relationally. So we don't want to just come together to feed that wound. We want to come together to say, hey, we can share over this experience that for whatever reason has brought us here. We can relate over the human experience of survival emotions. I have fear, you have fear. I have anger, you have anger. I have despair, you have despair. and how we got there is different. But we're not going to focus on how we got there. We're going to focus on, now what do we do about that? How do I make sense out of this lived experience as a human? And how do we collectively shift out of this so we can collectively thrive? To me, that's what it's about. And I just think that we're at a tipping point where we can't do it individually. It's too much to take on individually, and it's too slow to take it on individually. We need a collective. We need momentum around this. Because once we have some momentum, where there's some collective shifting that's happening, some collective healing that's happening in those spaces, there's like a ripple effect that starts to happen.
Do you think a lot of people are aware that they've been in this survival state? And could you give some symptoms or some clues to people that might help them to realize, actually, I have been in this survival state? Because I think there might be some groups that have a real clear awareness that they have been under a lot of stress, and there's other groups that would say, yeah, I'm not there, thanks, but I don't need that kind of help, and I'm not on that survival mode right now. So it might be helpful for people to identify things that are going on inside of them. Maybe you could help them identify.
Yeah, I don't know if people are aware. I don't know how many people are aware of whether or not they're stuck in a prolonged state of survival stress. A simple way is just to ask yourself, do you find yourself experiencing chronic fear, anger, or despair? Or do you find yourself avoiding feeling altogether? Do you notice if you're in a state of irritability all the time, or are you feeling like you're in a state of collapse and depression? Do you feel like you're in a state of hopelessness, or that you're avoiding certain people and certain conversations? Are you living in fantasy land, where, as long as you have the comfort of following the rules, that you think that everything is fine and normal and is just going to restore itself back to what it was before? Where are you finding your comfort? Have you noticed whether or not you scroll more? Do you find yourself consuming more substances than normal, eating more foods that aren't healthy for you than normal, watching more TV than you normally were? Do you notice that there's higher conflict in your home environment? Are your children more miserable than they were before? Have you stopped dreaming? These are all symptoms that, for generally speaking, we just tolerate, right? Until we can't tolerate it anymore. And it's usually when we can't tolerate it anymore that we seek out therapeutic support. And by then, we've internalized that there's something wrong with me, with I. That there's something wrong with me, that I can't handle my life anymore. So I must have done something wrong. Instead of actually, that's just an indication that your nervous system can't tolerate the chronic survival stress that it's been under for however long it's been. And you hit a tipping point, because we all have a tipping point. We all have a threshold. So whether you've hit that threshold or not, I would say, don't come to these kinds of groups because you hit that threshold. Come to these groups because you don't want to hit that threshold. Right? So you might be anywhere on that spectrum. I think naming that you're in a state of chronic survival stress is key. It's important to recognize. And that actually, we shouldn't be just adapting. We're an adaptive species. Look at nature. Nature is constantly adapting to its environment. And that's an incredible thing about being attuned to nature and being a biological organism, is that we're adaptive. But adapting to sick environment doesn't mean that we should be adapting to a sick environment if we can change the sick environment. Nature can't change the sick environment, so it adapts without resistance. We can change a sick environment if enough of us realize that it's sick.
So it's more than just about me. The structure needs to change. but I'm part and parcel of that change. If I don't step into the space that would help me to transform, I'm not going to change the structure. I'm not going to be part of that change.
We're part of that living organism.
Yeah.
We're not separate from it. So as we do the deep inner work ourselves and learn these very important tools that will help us at least learn how to shift in and out of that survival state, so we're not stuck in a prolonged state of survival stress, which we know is the precursor to almost all illness and disease. Whether it's mental illness or physical illness or relational illness. It's actually not very complicated. It's just we make it super complex.
You know that. I don't think a lot of people know that. I'm not sure I've even thought about it, but this sense of not feeling at ease every day when I wake up, or over and over for months or years, this actually leads to disease, is what you're saying.
Yes.
I'm not sure a lot of people have that awareness, but it's good to understand that.
Yeah, prolonged survival stress.
What percentage of the population would you say is in that place?
I mean, I can't give you a statistic, but my guess would be most.
Yeah, I think so too. Even from time to time.
This is what we've come to know as normal. We've come to know what's normal is chronic survival stress, and then when we have so much survival stress that is so shocking and overwhelming to our system, we experience that as trauma. So we have, as a species, come to adapt to an environment in which we exist in chronic survival stress and or trauma, and very few of us can tap into a real thriving state. So that's a really big thing. My hope is little baby steps. This might be huge, but I do believe in the innate intelligence in our biology and in our greater system as a whole, in which it wants to thrive. And if collectively we start to understand that, and we start to see that all this survival stress is creating barriers for us to thrive, just like it would create barriers in the natural environment, right? And yet we still live, which is so fascinating to me. Like that, we still function, we're still alive, we're still here, even under prolonged, long-term survival stress. As a species, we just keep adapting and we keep showing up. But in that, we have an increase of illness and disease. We have an increase of mental illness. We have an increase of self-harm. We have an increase in addictive behaviors. That's all adaptation to chronic survival stress.
Thank you, Jennifer. I know you could speak for hours about this. I just want to thank you for explaining where you're at and where you would like to take a group, and I'm excited to join a group. So sign up.
Cool.
But let me just wrap up with what next steps are. So I think what June, your intention is to invite me in to help facilitate a process with a group to be able to embody some of these skills that we're talking about. The overarching, hope would be to shift from survival to thriving. That's the overarching hope. The other hope would be that through the experience of participating in a group, that they would learn skills to maybe have courageous conversations with loved ones, coworkers, start in that circle, right? So feel more confident, more capable, more courageous to try to connect heart to heart and have a meaningful conversation. And then ultimately the group that we're starting with is a foundational group. So what I just talked about was like high level stuff. So the group would be foundational, where we would start at the beginning, working through those systems that I talked about, and then learning skills that support each system's health. And we would start with that biology system first, And I always say to my clients, we begin by learning the letters. So we would start in this group space with more of the psychoeducational side of thing to learn the necessary letters, and that's the mystery, that support the health and well-being of your nervous system, and then how to apply that. So then we're going to learn, we'll practice skills to apply that. So that's the foundation. So that's kind of the entry point, and that's what we're starting with, I believe, is that we start with that. The next level would be being facilitated in a process that I've developed over the past few years. I've called the process the Flowing Fears process. It's a very specific step-by-step, 10-step process that actually helps somebody shift from that state of survival stress and emotional discomfort and discord down and under and up and out into their thriving state, where they can then step into the new belief. They can step into the elevated emotion. They can step into the person that they want to become. So it's a 10-step process that guides them through that, and it's called the Flowing Fears process. That would be kind of phase 2 of the group. So phase 1, foundations. Phase 2, we would engage in the 10-step process. So that's what we want to invite anybody who's interested in joining, is to begin with the foundations level. And right now we're piloting it.